I don't need to revisit that. That's fine. So noticing that and deciding how seriously you need to take those thoughts, I think is really helpful because I really do think a lot of people are spend a lot of time kind of revisiting those uh, interactions,
Right.
ideas, thoughts, and you don't need to. So that's my challenge. You don't need to pay so much attention to them, but in order to do that, you need to know what they are.
Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Own Your Awkward. Talk about awkward. I can't even say the name of my own podcast, but we are here. We are moving forward, and I am so excited to have Brian Kerr here today. Brian, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's so nice to see you again. And we find each other in these little rounded rectangles instead of across the table at a coffee shop, which is how we've encountered one another most recently.
Definitely. It's interesting because we met initially online through LinkedIn, but then are both here in Tacoma and have been at a few different things, and it's been great to actually get to know you. And it's one of the things that I love about the technology we have is that we can meet people that we might not run into just around town, or we may have been in the same places and passed each other and not really known. And then it's like,
Mhm.
wow, we can really lean into all the different opportunities. And it's been a pleasure for me to get to know you the last few months as we've been able to have coffee together and get into some deep conversations. And I've learned so much from everything that you bring to the table. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and isn't that just I know we've got business to attend to, but isn't that just such the Tacoma experience? I feel like there's so many people here who are, working remotely, working somewhere else, kind of doing their own thing. And it can take that little bit of extra effort to actually connect with the people that are here. And once you do, it's amazing. And that's been a real, experience that I've had over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, which we could talk about a bit if you want. But I feel like that's just um, one of the things I really love about being in this town, right? There's so many people that are plugged in to somewhere else, but guess what? We're here and we're all interesting and weird and I guess awkward in our own ways.
Right.
So why not hang out a bit?
Exactly. Yeah. I actually feel like and maybe it's because I was raised here, but my brand just really lines up well with the vibe of Tacoma. It's awkward,
Hmm.
for people who
Hmm.
aren't from here. We're in Tacoma, Washington, and one of the nicknames of the city is Grit City. We're a good mix of people. And to your point about meeting people and then running into them and just having it continue, it's almost like when you buy a new car and you've never noticed that car on the road, and then you can't not see that same car every time you go out. Now you see them everywhere. And it's like you meet
Hmm.
somebody and you may have passed them, and now it's like, now I'm running into Brian every month or a couple, every other week. And I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because Tacoma is, I could go on about it. I love Tacoma. I don't want people to come here if they don't appreciate that about it. So it's for the right people. And, we welcome everybody. Please, come, but don't come if you're trying to change it too much. So Brian, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but what's something just that you see that's going really well right now as we start out a new year? We've got, different feelings and it's easy to get caught up in negativity. So I like to just get an idea of, a good perspective you see out there right now.
Yeah, well, and I think I think for me, one thing I see is that idea of community, and I think we actually just touched on a good example of it. And um, I think it's so important right now as everybody, I think, is kind of hunkering in for what's going to be a very, interesting, difficult, bad, describe it however you want. Like we're in for a turbulent ride ahead in various ways. And I think it's just a good moment for everybody to kind of find their spot, find their, kind of reconnect with their community. And I think it's also for me, it's kind of a seasonal thing where I'm looking out out looking out at the back garden here, and it's looking a little bit gray, and it maybe has been getting a little bit colder. And so for
Yeah.
me, it's just the time to kind of have a plan for what are we going to do? When are we going to get together? When am I going to leave my house? Because I have a particular, way of being and way of working where it's catastrophically easy for me to not leave the house in a day. And that
Right.
always feels like a mistake. So I think the thing that's going well is that idea of community and of connection. And I think people are, or at least the people in my world are kind of looking for that right now. And I've been enjoying that a lot.
Yeah, that reminds me of when I first worked for the first time I was at a company where we were going through a merger where we had been bought.
Hmm.
And it was, I was maybe 21 and just remember feeling like this is not where I was going to work. I was going to work at the place I got hired for. And that was the plan. And how
Hmm.
dare they? Like I had all these feelings of betrayal and loss. And I remember driving home that day, picking up applications for other places to work. And I really had to kind of have a check with myself of wait, my life hasn't changed yet. My community that I work with, I love the people I work with. That hasn't changed. I eventually left that place, but I think our knee-jerk reaction when we encounter change is to kind of scramble for getting ahead of the change so it's within our control. And that isn't all we're a lot of times throwing away maybe throwing out the baby with the bathwater to, use an old expression where it's like, but in reality, it's like, wait, has what the community that we're involved in, the people that we see, like, let's lean into that and embrace that. And that's what we need to stick with because a lot of times we get worried about all these outside factors that may or may not have even become a threat yet.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And like you said, Tacoma is a perfect example of community. So
Yeah, and I think we're lucky in that way. But I think the flip side of that for me with this idea of community is that it's not um, it's not just a local thing as well because I've really have enjoyed when things get tough is the time when you can sort of get and give some of that value out of the connections you've made or the
mhm.
communities you've built. And I've just seen so much of that happening with, some of my weird little online communities that I'm in and that kind of thing. In addition to just the pleasure of you know, going to some of the local events or participating in a few of these groups that have been forming and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Now I am
uh,
curious
mhm.
because that's something that I'm involved in some online events, especially through LinkedIn, where I have connections from all over the world, which is great, and people that I've gotten to know beyond just sharing and liking posts, but had great conversations with over the years and collaborated on stuff, as well as that coffee shop cafe vibe where you walk in and meet people locally. How do you balance um, that space of the online, the global community, and the in person? Like you said, you can choose not to leave the house. So where do you find the right mix for that?
Yeah, I that's a great question, and I think for me personally, it has a lot to do with um, what is the thing that I am missing in a particular day. And so if it's, for example, if it's a day at work where I'm doing a lot of facilitated meetings or presenting over like a span of a couple of hours, which happens a lot. At the end of that, I'm drained, and I might want to just go on to some unnamed, inconsequential social network and see who's doing what.
Hmm.
And in other cases, maybe I'm having a really quiet day, and that's when I need to go, talk to somebody that is not one of my not one of my children or my partner. But I love
Right.
I love talking with all of them, but kind of going out and about. And I think there is that real sort of um, a little bit of a rhythm or something there. And the reason I mention that, Andy, is I think that uh, there are a lot of people who I spend time with who would maybe benefit from paying a little bit more attention to how can you kind of like charge up or get energized by engaging with community, especially since so many of our habits have changed. And so here's a really simple example, like a work thing. People are doing a lot of remote meetings and video conferences and stuff, and that's old hat for me. I mean, it's Andy, I think it was 2006, 2005 was the last time I had like a desk in an office that somebody else
Oh,
paid for. I've
yeah.
been
So
doing the like remote work and
you're
weird
ahead of
work
the
and
curve.
consulting for a long time. But like a really simple example that I actually see play out every day is the online meetings. Do people have their cameras on or cameras off? And there's
Mhm.
sometimes there's some, and we're still doing this even a couple years, past the start of COVID and everything. But I think it is a simple fact that for some people, showing up to a meeting with cameras on is like energizing. It get to see everybody. And then for
Yeah.
some people, it's more of a like, oh my God, I have to be like apprehended or I have to be
Right.
seen, And so really just paying attention to that is I think very powerful. And there's a lot of people who I feel like would have an easier day or a better day if they gave themselves a little bit of space to kind of notice what powers you up and what makes you feel exhausted at the end of any given
Mm.
interaction or
Right.
hour work session or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's so key to be in tune to, in that we we go through our days with a set of experiences, and those can be different every day, and we can have several
Hmm.
days that are similar, but we don't always take the time to say, at the end of this day with this experiences, did I feel drained or did I feel energized? And on the days that I felt energized, what were the things that were involved in that day? And on the days that I felt drained, what were the events or the activities I was in, so that we can then take the next step of planning to have a better outcome and end the
Yeah.
day feeling happier. If I have a day that's full of meetings that are draining, but the days that I get a walk in, or the days that I can tune out in one way or another, that adds some energy, then can I at least squeeze in that activity for 15 minutes or something?
Hmm. Hmm.
But that does take a serious amount of self-reflection, and unfortunately, I think, what do you think gets in the way of that? Because I feel like sometimes we just get in the doing mode and we don't get in the growing mode.
Yeah, I think Andy, that's it. I think people are so busy and have so many commitments, and um, it does take a little bit of extra effort to do that perspective taking, kind of, take a step back and sort of see what you're doing and what commitments you have and, where that energy gets restored or depleted. Um, yeah, I think it's a bit of a puzzle to me because as part of a lot of like, for example, a lot of work activities I do, we'll go and get into things like ethnography or just paying attention to what's going on, right? Like let's
Mhm.
just see, try to notice what's happening. And those are like very easy, effective things that you can do, but it is always a mystery to me why don't people do them? I mean, I
Mm.
can tell you why I started paying attention to some of those things, which was simply I was so miserable and you know, not showing up in the way that I wanted to in various ways that I just started, taking notes and journaling and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And some of the outcomes from that were things that I noticed that I could adjust. I think the good news is most people it's very easy to help people practice that a little bit or get started with that because it's something where you don't need equipment, you don't need a
Sure.
certification, you don't need to pay like triple net, you don't need to lease office space, right? It's just
Right.
something you can do. But yeah, it's just one of those funny things about either the human condition or the like us being uh subjects of capitalism, whatever. Like we're so busy just getting the stuff done, right? And like you're like, oh my God, if I do a great job at work today, maybe I can watch two episodes of my favorite TV show instead of one, right? Or maybe I can play three matches in the video game instead of two. And that
Right.
push to kind of fill the time. Uh, and so, yeah, it's hard to just take that half step back and see like what really, what really makes you happy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that really resonates, especially where you called out that point of just being at such misery that I think when we get to that space, that gives us a choice of do I stay in this and wallow in it, or do I examine it and figure out how to move forward? And unfortunately, we sometimes have to get to that feeling of rock bottom or helplessness or something where we
Hmm.
finally
Hmm.
say, I want this to be the rest of my life and it's got to change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The sort of like response to a crisis, or for me, it was. I'm thinking about some kind of lower moments in my life, like at this point, a decade ago, honestly, where I could really tell that if I didn't kind of um, change some of what I was doing and how I was responding and how I was showing up to myself, then I was at risk of losing things that were really meaningful to me, right?
Mhm.
Relationships and other things. And so, yeah, I mean, I just sort of I feel like I just kind of bumbled through my 20s or whatever, got to a certain point, and then uh, that was the cause for me to take stock and start to notice some of these things. And um, I think it's just my good fortune and good luck that I kind of backed into that early enough before I actually, uh, caused any problems for anybody
Right.
or whatever. But it was a real. I could think back to that time, and that was a real unhappy time for me. And the countermeasure, as it were, the response was just really paying attention to what was going on, and then figuring out, okay, well, how seriously do I want to take any of the, any of the like thoughts or behaviors or opportunities that are there. And that's something that I think is available to anybody. But you got to get out of that like slipstream or that mode of doing one thing after another, and then it's half an hour past your bedtime and you're still worried about things. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It creates this it's like that frantic feeling and I have as I've gotten more aware of my activities and myself, I notice that when I feel like I call it like that henny penny, like the sky is falling, or like
yeah, yeah.
I
Hmm.
think of the scene from Bambi where the birds are in the woods and they're like, "Don't fly, don't fly," and then as soon as one of them flies, it gets shot, and then they all freak out
Yeah.
from the gunshot, and then they all fly up, and it's just a bad ending for the birds, but it's that anxiety of like, oh, if I don't take action, I'm not going to solve this. But sometimes staying where we're at and actually sitting in the peace and working with is what we need to do. But you're right. There's times in my life where I hadn't learned those lessons yet, and I look back and the thing that I often say to myself is, well, that would have been a much cheaper lesson had I learned it sooner. And
Hmm.
well, that was a $30,000 lesson, or that was whatever the, you know, issue that it caused you, whether it was a loss of promotion or you know, um, debt or whatever thing it was. I'm like, that would have been, and maybe it's just emotional expense, but sometimes it's like, had I learned that sooner, it would have not cost me as much.
Yeah, yeah. But then maybe the flip side is that, it's the accumulation of all of those things that led you and that lead anybody to be where they are today. So I mean, there's good aspects to everybody's situation, even if they may not be immediately visible or apparent, depending on how bad somebody's feeling or doing at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it, I think it's better to learn something eventually or to figure something out eventually. And there's not much cash value in wishing that you had done it a decade earlier, which is, frankly, something I do all the time too, Andy, right? I
Mhm.
imagine like, oh, I could have had this, I could have had this like different and some way better life if I had done things differently or if I had done the same things earlier,
Yeah,
as you
right.
said. But also, like, That's fine. I'm so happy to be kind of who I am and where I am today that maybe that's just what the path was like.
Right. And all of those decisions, mistakes, errors, lessons, whatever experiences we've had in life have gotten us to where we are today. And I'm so happy and grateful to be having this conversation with you. And if I would have made one step in a different path anywhere along the way, we might not have met because those could have led me to other circles of people, other situations. I might not be doing what I'm doing today. And I definitely wouldn't be doing it with the passion, understanding, and experiences that I bring to the table had I not had those painful experiences.
Hmm.
So with that, speaking of what we're doing today, Brian, we got to know what's your awkward thing?
Yeah, I think my awkward thing is that I am so incredibly critical of myself, and I feel like I'm always doing a bad job, and I feel like I didn't, maybe you could think of it as like perfectionism. Maybe you could think of it as a kind of a part of this kind of evangelical upbringing that I had. But yeah, I mean that's my thing. And it's I think it's kind of funny at this point because I would like to think that I have come up with a lot of things to kind of wrap around that to
Mhm.
respond to it. But if you were to dig deep, deep down, it's still there, right? In terms of my just utter conviction that nothing I do is any good and that I can work really hard at something and people will say, oh, that's terrible, we don't like it. And that anybody who is a friend of mine is just faking it, right? Or
Right.
putting up with me for some reason. And so, yeah, call it like, I don't know if it's perfectionism or sort of some sort of deep insecurity or just, I really think I'm just way too hard on myself. I always have been. I expect, given the data that I have,
Right.
that I probably always will be. But I think that's my thing.
Uh, I love that. As you were sharing that, I have a book I want to give you that
Okay.
a friend of mine wrote that's called Fire Your Narrator.
Okay.
And
I
it's
like
because I
that.
can relate to that so well that I'm next time I see you, I'm going to give you a copy of that. But along those, but back to your
Hmm.
situation, how before you understood it, and maybe still sometimes, how has that gotten in the way of you doing what you want to do, or held you back in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a lot of examples. I mean, I think that part of it is, and this is also something where I'm so deeply uncomfortable saying this, Andy, but I'm going to say something nice about myself as part of this, which is
Good
I
for
think that
you.
I'm also a pretty smart person. I'm not like
Mhm.
a, like, brain surgeon genius or anything, but I do, I'm a smart guy. I like learning. I'm always paying attention to stuff. Uh, and so I think the combination of those feelings and that kind of aspect of my capabilities or kind of who I am means that for a long time, uh, until I sort of started figuring some of this stuff out, really, I would always do kind of the easiest thing, right? So if I had
Mhm.
like the choice of I can do thing A that's like I know how to do it and I know it'll be fine, or I can do thing B that'll be more interesting and challenging and risky. I would show up as being very risk averse and say, okay, I'm just going to do thing A because I
Right.
want to make sure that nobody notices what a terrible, terrible, horrible
Yeah.
person I am, et
The
cetera.
spiral that your brain goes
Yeah,
into
yeah.
of all the bad self-talk.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think for me, I still have a little bit of that kind of lowercase c conservative, like I'm careful and I plan and that kind of thing. But
Mhm.
I've also, I spent a decade supporting my family as an independent consultant, which is about as risky a thing as you could.
Yeah, that's a huge
Yeah,
accomplishment.
yeah. And so the point is that, that was a big way that showed up. I would just make the kind of the safe choices and like the
Hmm.
unambitious choices and frankly, a lot of ineffective choices just because I knew that my chances of like not not messing up were higher if I did that. And I was so scared of screwing up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's the part where in my imagination, I can say like, oh, if I had some of the appetite for uncertainty and so forth that I've developed over time, if I had that earlier, then yeah, I would have made different choices and probably had a much, bigger bank account or whatever,
Sure.
whatever like meaningless yardstick we're looking at.
Right.
But I think that's kind of been the thing in terms of how it showed up,
Hmm.
externally or in terms of the choices I've made, the things I've done. And then I think how it impacted myself is I just spent, you know, probably cumulatively like 10,000 hours of my life just beating myself up mentally for no good purpose,
Right.
right?
So
For no reason.
so you've actually by the standards they say of getting 10,000 hours to be an expert, you are an expert at bullying yourself at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, exactly.
You've hit the mark.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So was there a turning point or a catalyst where you noticed this was something that could be in the way or that needs to
Yeah,
be?
yeah. I mean, I just had I've already alluded to the sort of a low ebb, a little while ago, a decade ago. And, I just went out and, and I've spoken publicly about all this before, so I don't mind, I think it's good to talk about this sort of thing. I did get a sort of a depression diagnosis. I went on medication for a while. I did therapy. That was great. I started getting really serious about something that I had dabbled in before, which was like meditation and various forms of contemplative experience, silent meditation, that kind of thing. And you know, a lot changed, kind of coming out of all of that. And what I'll say is that uh, the only of those three things, the only one that I really do regularly is the silent meditation. That's something that's stuck with me all the way through, and is kind of like the foundation on which I can. I'm mixing metaphors here, but it's like the thing that I've used to get away from that sort of awkwardness that we
Yeah.
talked about. Yeah, and one other area that kind of actually intersects all of those three, where I think the like medical or like the medicine helped, uh, therapy helped, meditation helped. Kind of in the middle was this idea of being able to slow down a bit, pay attention to my own thoughts and experiences, and really get a lot of practice at figuring out how seriously to take them, right? And so one method that a lot of people use that I actually don't stick to as much as I would probably do better if I did, but I'm sure you've heard about it, and people watching this will have heard of it, like cognitive behavioral therapy. And
Right.
in fact,
Yeah.
I know uh, one of the members of your cohort recently at the Awkward Talks spoke about that. But I
Right.
think that's a good example of a technique that I've used a little bit to great effect, but just that general idea of just paying attention to like what's going on, what are you really worried about, what are you afraid is going to happen,
Hmm.
and then how do you want to respond to that. So
Right.
yeah, so to summarize, because I've taken us on a little journey there, it was like that basket of diagnosis of depression, sort of some medication and that like medical course to deal with that. Uh, this silent meditation, and then some therapy, both like with like in counseling, but also just with a one of these things, a pen, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Piece of paper, right? Just
Yeah.
working it out. Yeah.
Doing the deep dive. I love that. And I love that you share kind of the full experience of all the different things that have been tried. I think a lot of times when we are on a journey, there's this sense of if we start something and don't finish it and not finish it, but don't keep it going forever, that's some sense of failure of like, oh, I gave up
Hmm.
that or I
Hmm.
stopped it. But it could have served that time. And what I love about what you've shared is you you worked with all of those different ways to work through that time that you needed to. and then you stuck with the things that resonated with you and said, you know what,
Mhm.
this piece really serves me going forward, and I'm going to continue the silent meditation and whatever piece makes the most sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I do think that there are um I was just fortunate to have a lot of, supports in my life at the time,
Mhm.
top of the list would be my sweetheart, Leanna. She uh really helped, I think, both in terms of putting up with my stuff. I don't know if we cuss on this thing, so I'll just say
It's
this, my
okay if,
stuff.
yeah, it's
Uh,
fine.
and then also actually giving me some of those tools and stuff to basically go find what are the building blocks going to be for
Yeah.
that foundation on which I can move out of it. So, I do think that there are a lot of people who, um, I don't know. It's hard to. I don't want to surmise too much about other people's, situations or circumstances, but I think that there's a lot of times where people find themselves in a situation like that. If they had a little bit more support or a little bit more time,
Sure.
or could try a few more things, then there's a path out. And I'm just aware of it. We're in a context where, for example, when I had when I was in like actively in therapy, guess what? That was super expensive, right? It is for
Right.
most people in
Yeah.
most contexts. And I was just fortunate that, at that time, through some whatever combination of insurance and out-of-pocket stuff, I could do it. But that's such a real barrier to a lot of people who could benefit
Right.
from it, and that sucks.
Yeah.
So I wish that everybody who found themselves in that circumstance or any circumstance like it could have the time and space to go find what they need. But the
Hmm.
reality is not everybody is going to have that, and not everybody who has those resources will be able to grab onto them and make something of it. Um,
Right. Now you
yeah,
mentioned
that's a
having your
downer, huh?
no, no, it's and I've been happy to see that there have been more resources available lately to get more accessibility than there has been in the past. But you're right, it's a
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
expensive solution, and I've been glad to
Hmm.
see that there is at least more, especially with things being virtual. I think that opens up some more doors. Um,
Yeah,
but you're
absolutely.
but you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned your support system, and that's one thing I'm always curious about as people identify, come to terms with, start to own their awkward thing. Um, how did that shift relationships, and how did the world accept the new Brian as you know, had some change in yourself through that?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think one thing I realized throughout all of that, Andy, is again, when so much of that was in my own head, right? Like I think people that knew me could tell, like, oh yeah, maybe this guy's like, 15% happier and 25% less uptight, but it's still like fundamentally the same person, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
So there's that like kind of continuity there. And then also I just, um, um, y- I think it makes me a lot easier to deal with, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
In 2024, almost 2025, compared to, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, I was real pissing it. I just really was like above and beyond the way that many like, ornery, young men are pissing it. It's like I went above and beyond the call there. Um,
I think we have to be able to say any person who's done the work has to be able to say that about themselves at looking back at some point in their life. And it could have been
mhm.
yesterday. Sometimes it's like I was a pissant yesterday. I own it. But you're right. I mean, we all have those pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I mean the thing that I've noticed, going back to your question, the thing that I've noticed more recently is that um for me it's become apparent that um the one part of my life and my experience that I don't sort of talk about as much relative to everything else is that, sort of uh the silent meditation and some of the Buddhist ideas and community kind of wrapped around it. And I do have a community there, which is
Yeah.
great. But to me, like I've just noticed that, um, you know, well, just a really pragmatic example. In 2017, I set up, I'm a nerd, right? Doing stuff online all the
Gonna
time.
go
So
deep
in
on everything.
2000, yeah, in 2017, I set up my sort of current organization for my like personal website, and it
Mhm.
had four categories on it. And one of those was meditation. And to this day, that's the one that like I have the least amount of stuff in, yet
Mhm.
it's more important to me than all the other ones. So it's just clear
Oh,
to me that
yeah.
that's an area that's still sort of like blossoming, I guess, like in
Mhm.
terms of, I have more people to connect with and more things to, more things to do there. But there's less continuity there, right? In terms of
Mhm.
uh, facilitation is something that I got interested in 2006 when I went to a conference that was facilitated by a guy called Michael Herman in Chicago, who's one of the best facilitators in the world. But I just met him because we were like bunk mates at this conference, and he
Oh, wow.
facilitated this conference, and I said, "Oh my goodness, the fact that a human being can do this and like have this transformative effect on a room full of 100 human beings is something that I want to be able to do." And so if you do the math on that, like that was an interest that I had, a decade before the sort of crisis that I talked about.
Right.
And while I was in this phase of being sort of hampered by this awkwardness, so I have a whole group of people that are interested in facilitation and kind of know me for that, where, the when things change, it was probably just, oh yeah, Brian's doing a little bit better at that, right? Or like Brian looks less nervous in
Oh,
front of a
sure.
group. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But that interest in um, certain Buddhist texts and approaches and meditation and stuff, that's something new where I went and found new groups of people, etc. But it's a little less integrated into the rest of what I'm doing. That's
Mhm.
kind of where things are now. Am I making
Right.
sense there?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I guess that kind of leads into my next question. You kind of touched on it there is, when I look at talking to people about their awkward thing and actually owning it, how has this experience served you? How has that self-criticism in the past served you today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in my work as a consultant, right? That's what I do for to
Yeah.
pay the mortgage, right? I have to
Hmm.
pay the bank a certain amount of money every month to keep this nice wall here,
Right.
that's kind of how that works. And so, I think what it does is I think it has ended up making me so uh, so empathetic with when people are feeling worried or down or afraid of things in the workplace. It's like I get it, and so I'm really good at uh, um, helping people be able to sort of notice and articulate where they're at and figure out what's the next little like incremental thing that we need to do to help you out. And that could be, dealing with changes or, uh, all sorts of ways it shows up. But I think you know, that's what I can do, right? Like even if somebody is showing up as a clown, right? Like
Right.
somebody is like not doing what they should be doing or like causing problems for other people. Uh, I feel like I have a pretty bottomless resource at this point of being able to just um, understand that like th when people do that or people show up in that way, it's because they're hurting and
Hmm.
or they're worried about something, and because of the conditions of a workplace and economic precarity and so forth that nearly everybody is in, uh, they may not even be able to see that for themselves. Right. And,
Right.
and, and that's just such a terrible place for people to be in. And it turns out that's something that I can help people along with, right? Like help with that next little step. And so that's kind of the thing that I got out of that whole experience.
Hmm.
And connecting back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, Andy, I wouldn't trade that away for anything because I feel like
Well, yeah.
that's something that really helps me uh, meet some of my goals in terms of what I actually want to do with my work, right? And with my life, which is all about reducing suffering and helping people go home on time,
Right.
from
Yeah.
their jobs. That's what my goal is, and that helps me do a better job of it. And so, you know, for as many statements as I can make that start with like "I wish things were different" or "I wish I had done this or that," uh, you know, the reality is I wouldn't trade that away. I don't think I would.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that perspective on it. And that's one thing I've been practicing doing is changing my I should have or I wish statements to just factual. Um,
Hmm.
had I kept that house, it would be worth this value. I would be different in
Oh,
this
sure.
regard.
Yeah.
Had I not sold my house in 2019 but waited till 2022, yes, financially I would have been different. However, that doesn't change all the other facts that have changed in that same time, that I wouldn't have been in certain situations, I wouldn't have learned other lessons, I wouldn't have developed certain skill sets. So if I can take it to the factual, now it's, well, yes, that may have been a benefit on this level, but it doesn't necessarily outweigh all these other benefits that I got in another area.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And everybody you meet is in some, their own like intermediate step on their own
Right.
sort of journey along that same sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the as an example, one of the most pointless thoughts that I ever had that I just hung on to because it was just so flat out stupid was the idea of, hey, what if back in like 2002 or whatever it was, I had bought Apple stock instead of buying the like iBook
Oh,
laptop
right.
that I needed, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
and so, and what I like about that example is that like that's a thought that I actually had, right?
Mhm.
That it was my brain trying to get me to like feel bad about something, and it was also just stupid, right? Because
Right.
somebody at the time, like I would have been like in my early 20s, right? Like I didn't have money to do anything with, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And the reason I bought a computer is like, oh, I was using the computer for work. I That was the computer I took to grad school when I went to
Right. Yeah.
grad
You
school,
may have needed that to complete your assignments, to get your
Yeah,
degree, to
yeah,
get your
yeah,
doctor, whatever. Yeah.
yeah. But
Exactly.
I think that that's that is like such a great example of it's easy to think about with the um with finance kind of stuff, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, if you could have invested money 100 years ago and hung on to it, you'd be in a different situation. But I think that happens with other parts of our like material conditions
Right.
and who we are as people, right? And um, so it's okay to it's okay to learn something when you learn it,
Mhm.
and
Oh, I love that.
to expect that you know to beat yourself up over not having learned something earlier is not great. And I
Yeah.
speak from experience there.
Hmm. I love that. Well, okay, you've teased us a little bit about what you do with your consulting. Tell us about that. Tell us about your business. Tell us about how people can support you. How do we get behind Brian and really, what serves you by our listeners getting behind you, and how can we support you?
Yeah, well, that's a great that's a very sweet question, Andy. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I used to be an independent consultant. I'm still consulting, but through a company, right? So I'm an employee of a consulting company, and so that's mostly just sort of like all wrapped up in its own thing. But the other thing that I do that is something that I've maintained from my independent consulting days is I do keep a website with a sort of a blog and a newsletter, and I think the thing that I really love to do is to be able to connect with people and stay connected with them over a long period of time.
Hmm.
And for me, that's the vehicle for that. So if you want to know, it's the website's called Improve Something Today. I'm sure Andy will put a link to it
Yeah, we
somewhere.
got the link right there. So if you're driving down the
Yeah,
road,
there
don't
you go.
worry about trying to
Yeah,
stop and write it down.
there
Improve
you go.
something today.
But what I really aim to do with that is I send out like one or two things a month, like 5 minute reading time or shorter. I keep it really simple. But I try to give people methods and ideas and stuff around, continuous improvement and learning and change management, and meditation is that other one that I really want to get back to. But for me, that's just the easiest way to keep in touch with people. And, the thing that makes me really happy is, for example, there's a here, we can maybe put this in the notes too. There's a book that just came out that I'm loving this book. I'm going to do the thing, Andy, with the book. There's
I
a book
love it.
called Multi-Solving by Dr. Elizabeth Sawin.
Hmm.
And I'll send you a link to this, Andy. This is a great book. This is a great like sort of systems thinking book that I
Okay.
love because it's very practical. It gives you specific things to go think about and do to take these systems thinking ideas to actually fix something in whatever your organization is, civic organization as well, not just business. But anyways, the point is, I recommended this when I sent, when I did my last newsletter, and then I've had three people come back to me and say, "Hey, I got this book. I'm interested in this book," and that's what energizes me. That's what I want people to do. So if you
So
want to
you
support
want the
me,
replies. I love that because
yeah,
we put
yeah.
things
Well,
out
and
there and don't always know if it
yeah,
served people.
yeah, exactly. And I want to, I want to give people the ability to take that next incremental step, kind of wherever they are, whatever they're doing. And so that's my focus. And I mean, sure, like you can hire me for a lot of money to go do that for your organization. I'm taken care of there, right? Like I'm working on a project at a Fortune whatever company now. I'm
Yeah.
happy to
You're
spend time
staying
with
busy.
them. But I also would love for everybody to have that if they want it. So if you want it, there it is.
I love that. Yeah. And so if you're listening, if you're watching, all the links are right below in the description. Click on those. Get on Improve Something Today. They say that Improve Something Today.
Improve
And
something today. Yeah. And think
yeah,
about think about how painful it was for a, somewhat recovering perfectionist to think about that, right? Instead of just
right.
like sit and not do anything forever, which is my natural state,
Hmm.
it's about like, okay, what are we going to do today?
Right. Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the things that with the work I do, I really try to bring people back to we can do one thing today and it's going to make a difference. Like
Hmm.
we don't have to solve everything. We don't have to find all the answers, but we can do one thing today and it'll make tomorrow easier or better. And just when we lay down tonight, we can say, man, I took a step.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, Brian, before we go, how would you challenge people to own their awkward, to get rid of that critic, whatever the thing is that they could lean into?
Yeah. What I would say is, uh, I know this doesn't work for everybody, but I think it works for more people than not. I would encourage you to get a piece of paper or like a note on your notes app on your phone or whatever, and whenever you think something bad about yourself, just write it down and do that for a day. Because I think what you'll find, and I've done this myself, I've done this with many people. I think what you'll find is if you just write down the things that uh, like you know, uh, had a phone conversation with somebody, and at the end of the conversation, I said, I'll see you soon. And it's not somebody that I'm ever going to meet in person,
Hmm.
right? Like that was just how I awkwardly ended the phone
Sure,
conversation.
right.
Uh, and that's something that like, I don't need to revisit that. That's fine. So noticing that and deciding how seriously you need to take those thoughts, I think is really helpful. Because I really do think a lot of people spend a lot of time kind of revisiting those uh, interactions,
Right.
ideas, thoughts, and you don't need to. So that's my challenge. You don't need to pay so much attention to them, but in order to do that, you need to know what they are. So pick a day, write them down. It'll be a weird day,
Uh-huh.
but I think something good might happen if you do that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting approach. I love the idea of just giving them space in order to have them take up less space. It's like, okay, let's
Hmm.
acknowledge them and so we can move on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And, maybe you get to a point where you can do whatever. There's lots of, and again, this connects back to there's lots of approaches, right? There's
Mhm.
therapeutic approaches to remove those thoughts or address the causes of them, or the cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Like responding to them in different ways. Uh, for me, and I guess I don't mind sharing this as well. The thing that I always come back to is gratitude, because I can tell that there's some part of my experience that's trying to like protect me from something or keep something bad from happening. And so when I have those ridiculous thoughts of like, wow, do you remember when you said that thing like unskillfully in 10th grade? It's like, yes, I do. But I can say thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. It's not, I know you're trying to help. It's not really what I'm into at the moment, and I can just kind of
Mhm.
let it go by. So
Right.
whatever that response looks like for you, I really do think that um, picking out some of those negative or unhelpful thoughts that you have in that stream of
Yeah.
what some people call the ego tunnel, right? Like
Right.
this thing that we're moving down. Uh, and noticing that you don't need to attach to them or cling to them or worry about them so much,
Mhm.
may help somebody have a slightly easier day. So
Yeah.
that's
I
my long answer to your short question.
No,
Sorry,
I
Andy.
absolutely love that. I am constantly telling people I'm going to make a short story long, and so prepare yourself, and I'll try to rein it in, but I'm not always the best at it. But that was great. I love that challenge. I'm going to do that in the next day or two. I'm going to sit down, start writing out a list because I do have those things that pop up, and it's like I don't want to give it this much space. I need to let it go, and I think that's a great way to do it. So I look forward to that.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here today. I knew it'd be a great conversation. It always is. I love that we can have one that we can share with the world because we have great conversations, and it's nice to be able to uh, bring the community in and be able to get your thoughts out there and pick your brain in a different way than we have before too, because we don't always get this deep sitting in a cafe. So I appreciate
That's
it.
right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Andy. So yeah, so for the last 45 minutes or whatever, the world has been our coffee shop, right? And I can
Exactly.
sort of
Yes,
expand it out a bit.
definitely. Everybody else, be sure to go out there, improve something today, follow Brian, sign up for his newsletters and blogs, and pay attention to him. And of course, own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.